Yeah, it's good to see you too, man. Like, I have to say, before we get started, I Bill and Ted 3, I freaking loved it.
Oh, thanks, Chris. That's awesome. I'm so glad.
Yeah, it was just like the right amount of just like fun and bring back old memories. And I got choked. I got to admit, I got choked up at the end. You
That's
know?
great. Yeah, that was our hope.
Yeah, it worked. It worked.
Yeah.
That closing montage was fantastic. It was fantastic.
Yeah, and all done during COVID. It was crazy.
That's crazy.
So, yeah.
Wow. Well,
yeah.
I'll take you off for a second. You know what? I don't
Okay.
even need an introduction. Let's just do our little title sequence here, and we'll start the show. Here we go.
Okay.
I have a little, hopefully this will impress you. I think I got this on fire. Well, I don't know. He doesn't need any introduction. Documentary filmmaker Alex Winter. You may have seen him in movies too, but you are solidly documentary filmmaking. I mean, Trust Machine, which I thought was awesome. I have not seen Show His Kids yet, but the Zappa documentary is epic.
Oh, thanks, Chris. Yeah, it's great to be here. You know,
dude. Yeah, after so many years, like
I know. Yeah, we go back a little ways. That'd be a whole other story.
Yeah. Back to Wheel of Death. Actually, we're working on a Film Threat documentary. You might make an appearance.
Oh, great. It's about time you guys did that. It's a great history.
Yeah. But the Zappa doc, I can't even imagine like wrapping your head around like, I'm gonna tell the story of Frank Zappa. Like his career is so varied. I mean, it's such a long, and then obviously he died too young,
yeah.
What is your entry point into a documentary like that is mostly archival in nature? How did you find the perfect like Zappa telling his own story? Like, where do you even start when you're like, all right, we're gonna make this doc? Where do you begin?
Yeah, this was Titanic. I mean, I've done archivally oriented projects before, and I pitched telling the story to Gail Zappa, to Frank's widow. I had a very specific take. I will say the one thing I had going in was I didn't want to make like the exhaustive, definitive Frank Zappa story. The guy, made 100 albums and was extraordinarily prolific and had lived 90 lives, and it's just not possible. I was really interested in telling a kind of narrative story about a man specifically, wanting to make art at a specific period in American history and the consequences of choosing to live that life. And Gail really liked that perspective. She said it wasn't what she was normally pitched. And I think she liked the idea of something that looked at him more as a human being and less as like some kind of quirky 70s mustachioed rock guitar god. So that gave us some boundaries, but look, she gave us access to the vault, which was like the end of Raiders of the Lost Ark, floor to ceiling, row after row after row of stuff, going all the way back to before he was born and all the way till after he died. And he had painstakingly made movies and videos and recut all of those things, and they were on every conceivable format. So it was an embarrassment of riches. And what we ultimately decided to do was, we preserved a lot of the media. That took us 2 years. And while we were preserving the media, we just watched and watched and watched, Mike Nichols, the editor, myself. And we made a decision during that process to really focus on things that spoke to Frank's inner life, his emotional life, and told that story at the expense of every awesome piece of crazy rock archival that we found, which someone else can do that later.
Well, I mean, that could be a mini series practically.
It could, yeah.
I mean, it reminded me a little bit of the Montage of Heck, Brett Morgan's documentary, where he had access to, Kurt Cobain's archives. Just in the sense that, like, yeah, I really didn't know anything about Frank Zappa in terms of his personal life. I didn't know about his relationship with his wife or how his kids came to being. I mean, I think I know how his kids came to being, but you know what I'm saying? Like,
yeah.
Like the context, and just, I feel like it's the first time I've really gotten to know him as a person. Your doc did that, as well as covering the career highlights. I love how you leaned into the fact that he loved monster movies.
Yeah. And that was helpful to us because he loved so many different kinds of media we were able to play with that media, and not in a cliche way. We were actually able to use those things thematically, because he was a collage artist as well as someone who just literally put pen to paper and wrote music right out of his head. He really liked taking from other things, musically, cinematically, TV, literature, art, whatever, and cobble it together and make things. He was hyper creative in that way. And that's a great starting place for a documentary. You can really begin to convey who he was through those things. But also, at the same time, for us, we really wanted to show what life was like during that time, and what, you know, him backstage with Joni Mitchell, and the impact that he did have on the musical artists around him was something that was very important to us. So it was really a balancing act, sort of conveying those two ideas, what was going on with him inside in this amazing world that he traveled in.
And you also included some of his creative collaborators, in particular Bruce Bigford, who I've known his work for years. I know you're a fan, so you got to interview Bruce today, and then you've got like this footage of Bruce, like I've never seen. That's just crazy. I mean, all the work that he did in collaboration with Zappa. Can you talk about that a little bit? Just because I know that you're personally a fan of Bruce. So
yeah, I mean, I love claymation and animation and different kinds of sort of extreme forms of playing with the medium in those ways, and that's been something I've been interested in since I was a kid. So I was very aware of Bruce. In fact, I remember when Baby Snakes came out, I was living in New York City, and I was working on Broadway, and there was this is Times Square, like this is Taxi Driver Times Square, right? And I remember the movie theater on Broadway had a little like monitor in front that just played the Baby Snakes trailer on a loop, and it completely captivated me. I was like, it was the weirdest, coolest thing I'd ever seen, and I was like, I don't know, 12 or 13. So I was really interested in meeting Bruce immediately, and we're lucky because he's since passed away. But I went up to where he lived in Seattle, and I filmed his studio, and I spent quite a bit of time with him. But we also found all of this media in the vault that even Bruce has never seen since he made it. Just hours and hours and hours. And to the point of your question, Zappa would create these relationships with artists, musical artists, fine artists, filmmakers, and he would work with them for years, just over time on projects and building ideas with them. I remember I had a phone conversation with Eric Bogosian when I first started. They had worked on something that kind of came to fruition and kind of didn't. The whole reason I wanted to get Kronos Quartet to play that piece of music that we filmed for the film is that they had played this piece once in 1983 that Frank wrote for them, and that was it. There was no recording of it. It was never seen or heard from again, and we were able to bring them back together and actually have them play this piece. And they spent the better part of a year around everything else they were doing, learning how to play this extremely difficult 2-minute long piece that Zappa had written for them. So I find that stuff really inspiring, but also sort of helped convey who he was.
The other thing I thought was really inspiring that you don't see in a lot of documentaries that, you know, cover someone who's prominent in music is the business aspects of his career. I didn't realize that he was truly the independent artist that sort of towed the line, like doing albums maybe for Warner Brothers and then like moving and doing, I'm going to do my own, you know, thing on my own. Like, I think that was really important to include. I'm sure you've read that book, The Tenacity of a Cockroach, which is that book by The Onion that they compiled all these interviews. And it reminded me of that aspect. Like, you don't see artists talk a lot about the business and how, and you really leaned into that. I thought that was a great choice on your part.
Thanks. I appreciate that, because that was something that I was really singularly interested in. It was one of the very first things I said to Gail when I met her and we began to form a relationship and I started having conversations with her. I was very impressed by both Gail and Frank's business acumen and the innovations they made in the recording industry and that are largely unsung. I mean, people within the, like, well entrenched in the record industry know that the current boilerplate record industry band contract was basically created by Frank and Gail. And as a feat of activism against the onerous terms that were there for artists before them. But I came up with it in a family of artists at a time, and it was my personal entree to the story. And I watched them struggle during the 80s when Reagan was elected and the NEA was killed. I mean, my family were modern dancers. They survived on grants. And It was very, very hard, and they had to be very industrious. And so you were basically a mom and pop artist shop. And I so loved that about Zappa, was that he was rigidly anti-mythology, in the sense that rock and roll is so much about bullshit, right? It's so much about creating mythos, just like the film business is, but even more. And Zappa worked so hard to strip that away. He wasn't interested in the hippie movement. He wasn't interested in the New York Velvet Underground art scene. He wasn't interested in going up and joining, Bill Graham in San Francisco. He really just wanted to keep it within his own world and do the work and not get caught up in sort of the kind of superficial trappings of the mythology of that stuff. And as a doc filmmaker, that's a big part of why I like making docs, is I like taking subjects and just strip mining the gunk of mythos off of them. It's very satisfying, and getting at what's actually going on beneath it. And Zappa was so articulate and transparent about, like, hey man, I don't make gazillions of dollars. I can't make this record unless I go on tour and make enough money to make the album. Otherwise, I got to go find another way to pay for it. And I love that about him.
Wow. And I also thought it was very revealing how Zappa talked about his relationship with Gail, and of course Gail commenting on that. He was very open about that. I thought that was just to get that level of intimacy, and be able to have Gail talk about their relationship. I thought that was fantastic. Was that part of when you spoke to Gail, like gaining her trust and in talk and speaking about that?
Yeah, I told her I wanted to make a warts and all film, and I knew about Frank's, the duality of being at the forefront of the sexual revolution and being a kind of an old school Italian dad and husband. And he really was both of those things. I mean, he would come home and be, have the big easy chair in the basement that he sat in and smoked his cigarettes and had 4 kids and a wife that he ran a business with. They really had a business together. She wasn't someone who was in the background of his life. They literally worked together every day. And then he'd go out on the road and all bets were off. And I said that to her, pretty early on as we developed some trust, that I really wanted to get her, I didn't need her to go crazy with it, but I wanted to get her to open up about that, because I just knew that wasn't easy. There's no way that that's easy. And we dug into the archival on that front too. And I really wanted to be open with that, with some of the more kind of unpalatably misogynistic opinions that he had, especially when he was younger. And I do think that he matured and he really evolved as a human being in so many ways, politically and in terms of his relationships with people. But, he was a rock and roller at the height of that era, and he behaved like one.
That's true. What's interesting is, you didn't directly get to interview Zappa, but it feels like you did. How carefully did you mine, or what was it like when you're going through every interview he'd almost probably ever done and try to find that here's him telling his story?
Yeah, we were lucky, because one of the first pieces of archival that I found was rows and rows and rows of interviews that had never been seen or heard before. Frank was really he was very interested in other people. And so if a journalist came over to interview him for like a 2-sentence soundbite for Rolling Stone, he would set up a film camera or a video camera, or even just a cassette recorder, and they would just have a 3-hour talk. And the guy would get, or the journalist would get their soundbite out of that, and Frank would have a 3-hour discussion about something that interested him, and he would stick it up on his shelf in the vault. And I found tons of those. I found film, video, every conceivable form of video. He had Beta, he had 3/4 cameras, he had every reel-to-reel 1-inch cameras. And then he just started recording them on audio. So that became, in a way for us, a way into his brain, because they were very intimate, candid conversations about things that interested him. And it gave us a very clear line of his narrative. And we didn't follow it. I mean, the movie isn't supposed to be pretending to be Frank in his own words or something. We're cheating all over the place and creating what we want out of the narrative to make it work as a story. But by the same token, I felt very, from an ethical and narrative standpoint, I felt very, very good about how we were expressing his viewpoints. I felt like we did have a pretty good lock on where he was coming from most of the time.
That's what I mean. I feel like the way that you curated what you chose and how he represented himself, it really feels like you put a lot of thought into into those choices. And you've been fortunate enough in a way to kind of listen to like a podcast. I mean,
Yeah.
by those cassettes. Zappa is, you know what? I don't know anything about it's coming out. Is it doing virtual cinema, drive-ins, anything like that?
Yeah, I mean, we're doing what we did on Bill and Ted, frankly, which is it's Magnolia Films, which I'm just incredibly grateful for. They're amazing. They're the best of the best for this type of movie and many other types, but I was very happy. And we're doing theaters where there are theaters, which, you know, even a few days ago, there were quite a few more. And right. As I was doing promo for Bill and Ted, I don't want to encourage people to go into theaters during a pandemic unless it is really safe wherever you are, which I'm not sure that exists anymore. But so we're mostly PVOD. I mean, we're mostly premium VOD and VOD, and we will be available everywhere in North America on November 27th. So Thanksgiving weekend, you know, Amazon, iTunes, whatever, DirecTV, like we'll be everywhere and very findable. And then we'll be rolling out physical, obviously, and streaming in those terms, and international is all going to follow.
Well, if it's at a drive-in, I've been going to the drive-in every week because that is the safest way to see a movie now. It's the best.
Yeah, we're at drive-ins. I think it's the ZAPPAmovie.com is Magnolia's website that's going to list all the theaters. We're in actually quite a few theaters, and we had our Bill and Ted 3 premiere at a drive-in, and I went, and with my whole family, it was really fun. I mean, it was actually a super enjoyable experience. And Zappa would play great on a drive-in because now with the technology, you get better sound through your. Yeah. I mean, you remember us being kids, like, you know, you'd go see Leprechaun 3 at the drive-in, and be some scratchy little box you stuck on your, you know, it's not like that anymore.
Yeah, I have one. I stole one. Right behind me. There's a drive-in speaker. I stole.
Oh, there you go. Yeah, there it is. Yeah,
I stole one of those. Terrible sound, very tinny. But no, the drive-ins are great. I'm glad the film is getting a big release. And how does it feel? Also, like I love how you've evolved your career. I mean, when I first met you, you're a filmmaker first. I mean, I don't even really know much about your acting career other than I always, you know, I loved you in Freaked, and I'd like to see Freaked get a re-release.
Yeah, me too.
At some point. Is there? Well, okay. So will there be a Freaked re-release or some?
I mean, we've been trying. You know, Tom and I were trying for years, and it was hard because it's like not, you know, at the top of Fox's list of movies that they're dealing with, and then they got sold to Disney, and now even the people we were dealing with before don't exist anymore, and we had to start all over again. And it's a slow process. There's no way it won't happen. We have an enormous amount of interest from like the people you would imagine that do these big re-releases are all very interested. We just have to find this. I feel like I'm in Brazil. I've got to find like the one person in that office, you know, at the end of some corridor, whatever, who's like, yes, I am that person who can help you do this. So it's a slow roll, but we'll get there.
And can you tease us a little bit about what you're working on documentary wise? At all?
Well, honestly, we've been, you know, it has been a really busy summer. We had Showbiz Kids on HBO, and then Ted 3 was a very hands-on rollout because of COVID. And Zappa has been extremely hands-on because of COVID. So there's an enormous amount of work getting this movie out. So I'm working on a politically oriented doc that I'm sort of waiting to see what's left of the planet before we figure out which way that's going. And then another music-oriented doc that I'm really excited about, but I can't talk about that much yet, other than you know, it's not quite as far back in time as Zappa. So I'm working on that. That would be really fun. I'm looking to do that this year.
Well, you know, Bill and Ted 3, while it's not politically oriented at all, I feel like in a way there was a message at the end that is exactly the message we need to hear right now, is that, you know, the world can be united through music. I just feel like, while I know that obviously not intended to be political, but it felt so perfect for the time. So I so appreciate that, and the Zappa doc, and just all dude, it's like great to see you blow up.
Yeah.
Doc filmmaker, you're like the next Alex Gibney.
Look, I love the medium so much. It's a great time because of the streamers and because of the economics of mid-budget movies being so poor. It really became a boom time for making docs. I love the medium. I think it's an amazing way to tell stories. So I certainly have a hand in narrative, and I'll certainly do more acting. But I'm never not working on whatever the next doc is, and I hope to always be doing that if possible.
That's awesome. Alex, thank you so much. Thank you for being on the Film Threat podcast. And it's great to see you again, dude.
Yeah, man. You know what, Chris? It's really a kick to see you. And I'm not even sure how many times I've seen you since you got that Triumph and were showing me that new motorcycle.
Oh my
God. I
God.
remember that vividly. But it's Film Threat has been a big part of my career, my whole career. So it's really, really great to see you again.
Oh, dude. All right. Well, we should connect after this. I'll let you in on a couple of things I'm working on. And I have to thank our sponsor. The podcast wouldn't exist. Thank you to storyblocks.com. Go to storyblocks.com/filmthreat. If you're a doc filmmaker, you probably know Storyblocks. Lots of tools.
Sure do.
Alex, awesome. Take care, man.
Right.
Good.
See you later, Chris. Good seeing you.